Good evening all and welcome to Nature Week. We haven't done this in a few years and it's back. We have a really good collection of nature and cryptid themed videos. We got skinwalkers, camping, deep woods, middle of nowhere. It's gonna be good. So I really hope you enjoy. For the next 5 days, be sure to tune in every day for brand new stories. It's gonna be good. And then we're going to finish everything up on Saturday with a massive compilation of cryptid stories and Skinwalker just to sink your ears into. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable because the cryptids are waiting to let the darkness take control. My grandpa was born in the last years of the 19th century and spent his entire life living in rural Idaho as a farmer and rancher. He had tons of old cowboy stories he would tell us grandkids. Most of them were funny, some were cautionary, but a few were downright creepy. When my grandpa was 6 years old, he, along with his older brother and a gang of kids from nearby farms, decided to go ice skating for the day. At that time, my great-grandpa was working as a ranch hand and the family lived near Chesterfield, Idaho, now mostly a ghost town. It was a bright and sunny January day in 1902, and though the temperature was low, the sun kept things somewhat warm. They had hitched sleighs to their horses and headed down to the Portneuf River to ice skate. There were 8 kids altogether, and they were excited to show off their new skates they'd received from Christmas. Along with my grandpa and his brother, there were 3 Robinson kids, Tommy Bayer and the Gooch twins. The best spot to skate was next door to the Gooch's ranch. The river there was broad and shallow, so the ice tended to be thicker, and if they did fall through, they would just get their legs wet. The kids spent a few hours ice skating when a loud scream came from a willow bush on the riverbank opposite them. The kids could only watch as what they described as a giant man covered head to toe in thick black fur came lumbering out of the bushes. It was carrying a large tree branch and was screaming in rage at the kids. They fled towards the sleds, trying to scramble up the riverbank in their skates. My grandpa, being the youngest, was at the back of the rush. He couldn't get a good foothold because of the skates and fell towards the ice. The giant was crossing the river towards them, screaming and swinging his branch. My grandpa was sure the creature was going to eat him. As my grandpa tells it, Lady Luck smiled down on me that day by the river, because as the giant was midway across the river, the ice gave way, and it submerged only to its shins, but it was slowed down considerably as it tried to get back on top of the ice. This gave my grandpa's brother enough time to jump down and cut the laces off my grandpa's skates. They left the skates and dashed up the riverbank and jumped onto the sleigh. As they looked back, the giant man was cresting the riverbank. To their relief, it didn't chase the sleighs. It just stood there hollering at the kids and swinging his tree branch menacingly. The kids were able to make it back to the Gooch Ranch, where they told their encounter to John Gooch, the twins' grandfather. Word spread quickly in the tiny farming community, and soon a posse was formed to hunt down the beast. Where the kids had been skating, they found footprints almost 2 feet in length. My grandpa's skates were found near the tracks. They had both been bent, like half a horseshoe. The tracks headed west into the nearby mountains. The posse followed them as far as they could go, but deep snow prevented them from traveling any further. The creature was never sighted in the area again. The story captivated the small community, and soon word traveled across the country of the Idaho Wild Man. It was even published in a newspaper article which described the event at the time. That spring, my great-grandpa decided to buy a little ranch in the Little Lost River Valley further north in Idaho. My grandpa had many other weird and creepy backwoods stories, but he always said this encounter frightened him the most. He was positive he would have been killed if the giant hadn't broken through the ice, and his brother had not had the chance to cut his laces. It was dark, a mile or so from the river, lots of woods. We were driving, no cars coming or anything. Night, like after 10, and not near a town. Right on the edge of our headlights, I saw something run across the road, super fast. So fast I almost thought it was glare on my glasses. I didn't say anything at first because my husband doesn't believe in paranormal stuff, Bigfoot or the like. I happened to look over, and he had a weird look on his face. I asked if he had just seen that, and he said, "Yep." I said, "Something really tall and thin?" "Yep." Now this part I was afraid to say, because I thought he would think I was crazy, but I said it anyway. I asked if it looked like a very tall stick, like a thin tree or stick from a tree with arms and legs. He said it did. It really bothered both of us. I've never seen anything like it, and I didn't even realize it was a thing until I started to Google it. I've seen ghosts and things, but nothing like this. This thing was just so fast. You blinked and it was gone, and when I say tall, it was like 10 feet, maybe more. We saw it for just a second in our headlights. I saw it for maybe 2 steps before we passed it, arms swinging very thin. It looked like a twig with arms and legs. If my husband hadn't seen it too, I would have never have believed I'd actually seen it. I know people doubt it, but I know I saw something. So my great-grandpa fought in World War II. He was drafted in 1943 when he was 23. He's 103 years old now. Just a few days ago he told me a story that he says is the most horrifying experience in his life. I asked him if it was about Japanese soldiers, because those guys were vicious back in the day. He told me no, it was something else. I don't know if this story's true or not, but it gave me chills. He said no one ever believed their story, but he still remembers it clear as day, and it still gives him nightmares when he dwells upon it. So, in 1943 he was stationed in the Philippines along with others to hold off the Japanese. However, one day he and his friend Samuel, who unfortunately passed away decades ago, got separated from their platoon. They were in a province making their way through the forest within the mountain area, when they both got lost and separated. My great-grandpa forgot which province it was, but he said there were a lot of forests and villages, so he and Samuel were looking and calling out for their comrades, when they ventured deeper and deeper till they reached the end of the forest. I asked him, "Why didn't you just radio your platoon?" He told me he did, but for some unknown reason the communications were scrambled and unintelligible. It concerned both him and Samuel, but Samuel said they needed to keep calm and tread carefully in case they ran into Japanese soldiers. So they both made it out of the forest, but then they noticed that the sun was about to set. My great-grandpa told Samuel that they needed to set up a camp, and Samuel agreed. That's when he noticed something off in the distance. It was a small wooden hut. They both decided to camp inside, so they made their way over to the hut. They knocked on the door and checked the place, but there were no signs of people anywhere, but there were clothes scattered around the ground. My great-grandpa said that maybe they fled in a panic, to which Samuel agreed. So my great-grandpa and Samuel set up camp and ate dinner. Samuel proposed the idea of taking shifts throughout the night to keep a lookout, just in case they get caught in their sleep by the Japanese. So they both woke each other up and took each place as a lookout while the other person slept. While great-grandpa was sleeping, Samuel abruptly woke him up and told him, "I spotted movement." My great-grandpa grabbed his rifle and asked him, "Where?" Samuel gave the binoculars to Grandpa and pointed in a direction. "I saw them in a field 300 yards away." Great-grandpa looked through the binoculars in the direction Samuel pointed at. At first he didn't see anything, but then he spotted something moving in the dark. However, when great-grandpa looked closer, it was just a wild boar. "It's just a pig," Grandpa told Samuel. Samuel took the binoculars to see for himself. "That's weird. It's just standing there," Samuel said. Grandpa looked at Samuel in confusion and asked what he meant. Samuel then said that the boar wasn't moving or anything, it was just staring at them from afar, and that it was starting to weird him out. Grandpa just laughed it off and told Samuel that it was probably just his mind playing tricks on him. But then something odd happened. The oil lamp that served as their light source inside the hut began going out. Grandpa went over to light it back up, and afterwards went back to his sleeping bag. But then the lights suddenly went out again. He went to check on it again, thinking the oil probably went out. But the strange thing was there was still plenty of oil. My great-grandpa lit it back up again and went back to sleep. But the flame went out again. That's when a terrified Samuel frantically went up to him and said, "It's gone." "What the hell are you talking about?" "The pig had just disappeared into thin air." At this point, Grandpa was starting to get freaked. Great-grandpa then asked him to explain. Samuel said that he was watching the boar through the binoculars when it suddenly just vanished out of existence. Suddenly, a loud thud came from above them, as if something landed on the roof. Great-grandpa and Samuel grabbed their rifles. "We need to get the hell out of here," Samuel said. Grandpa said the rest of the events that happened are one of the worst nightmares of his entire life. Great-grandpa told Samuel not to panic and stay low and quiet, so they did, while tightly gripping their guns close. A few moments later, Samuel starts screaming. Grandpa turned on his light and saw something straight out of a horror movie. Something that looked like a tongue which lodged in Samuel's neck. His friend was screaming in pain, trying to remove it from the neck. Great-grandpa snapped out of his shock and shot at the ceiling multiple times to hit whatever the tongue belonged to. After a few more shots, the tongue released Samuel and slowly retracted back into the hole on the ceiling. Samuel was gripping the side of his neck tightly and screaming as blood trickled down. Grandpa put a cloth against the wound and told him to keep pressure on it. After they collected all of their things and exited the cabin and made a break for it, Grandpa turned around and shined his light on the hut's roof. And what he saw, he described as the most evil-looking and ugliest thing he had ever seen. I asked him to describe what it looked like. He said it was humanoid. It had 2 gigantic wings that were bigger than its own body. The wings looked like a combination of a bat's and a hawk's. Its eyes were blood red and glowed in the dark, skin black as coal, wild unkempt hair and huge fangs that were visible even through its closed mouth. It just sat there perching on the roof staring at them. Grandpa acted quickly. He raised his rifle and began shooting at the thing, unloading all the rounds in the gun's chamber. Samuel did the same. But to their astonishment, the creature was unfazed and just continued to stare at them unbothered. At that point, Grandpa and Samuel began screaming like maniacs while running for the hills. By some miracle, the creature did not pursue them. They were both so scared, and they didn't care if they ran into the enemy, so long as they didn't encounter whatever the hell that was again. They managed to make it till morning and came across a small village where they rested in. That's when they learned from one of the locals that what attacked them was called an aswang, and that they were very common in the countryside. The locals told them that they were all in God's favor because they survived. After a few days, they were eventually reunited with their platoon. When they shared this story, only a few believed them, while the others thought they were probably drunk and ran into enemy gunfire, hence the injury on Samuel's neck. After the war ended, they all went home, but he could never forget the horrifying encounter that gave him severe PTSD. Samuel unfortunately passed away at the age of 80 due to a stroke. His story honestly freaked me out. I spent the good part of an hour googling aswangs and what they are. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I'm an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival, and I'm very familiar and used to wildlife. And I was charged by what I believe to be a cryptid called the Dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear cannot move how it did. And it was not a normal wolf, as they cannot comfortably run on 2 legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing so. This happened around June or July of 2007. I was 17 years old and more cocky then, but still knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in northwest Wisconsin, and I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night, it was wise to stay in the cabin or at least by the bonfire of the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things were if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night, you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day, the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy. That is until this incident. So this happened somewhere between midday and 2. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo, he was not, and I retreated onto the ATV trail in the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We'd had enough at this point, and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail, talking, and he was maybe 10 feet in front of me, when I decided to mess with him. I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw looked like a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds. It wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree with its clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur, and I just told my cousin simply that we had to go. The next thing I knew, he is sprinting, and I looked back at Wolfie, who had locked eyes and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran. When it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all fours, it charged us and sounded right on our asses, barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. It appeared to be nearly 7 feet tall when upright, and that where it should have had its front paws appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally, and I've heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know, they can't sprint on 2 legs. Nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more waddle on 2 legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or dogman, but I can't for the life of me think of anything else that sounds remotely similar to the events I saw that day. This happened about a year ago during the summer. Something you should keep in mind is that the house I had lived in had 1 acre of land surrounding the house. Where I had lived was near farmland. I had woken up around 8 in the morning on my living room couch, having fallen asleep the previous night, as well as my mother and sister who were sleeping next to me. I had planned to watch this movie I hadn't finished the previous night on my laptop, as well as eat breakfast in the dining room of the house. I had sat down at the end of this dining table, which was the closest chair to the kitchen. Keep in mind, if I leaned back on the chair, I would see right into the further side of the kitchen, where the door that led to my desk was, which had this huge window right next to the door. So I turned on my movie and started to eat my breakfast, as my dog trotted over to me and sat next to me. I believe I was about 45 minutes into the movie when my dog switched her spot, now sitting right under the archway that led to the kitchen, staring at God knows what. I felt her move, but I didn't really think anything of it. If it was serious, she would have been barking like hell. About 10 to 20 minutes go by, and I glance over at my dog, noticing she's still staring at something. This time, I heard shuffling/scratching over in the kitchen. I called out her name, but she just wouldn't move. So when I walked over, I followed her trail of vision and noticed she was staring at the window in the kitchen that leads to the deck of the house. I nearly crapped myself when I saw something or someone behind the window outside, peeping through the blinds. I forgot to mention there was a chair on the deck right under that specific window, so whatever the hell that was had to have been balancing on the chair to look inside. It looked bald almost, and white with a pinkish tone. It had been holding onto the window frame, peering at my dog and I, while scratching the screen on the window with this horrible, heavy breathing. I remember thinking in the moment it was a person trying to break in because whatever it was wanted to get in so desperately. The thing was sort of small, and it seemed as if it didn't want me to see the rest of its face, only its eyes. The whole time my dog had been watching whatever that thing was and not barking. I'm saying this because something as simple as the dropping of a cup will send my dog into a fit, barking like crazy. Even a voice coming from the TV would cause a great few minutes of barking from her. Now, as I said, I believed someone was trying to get in, so I ran over to the couch in the living room, shaking my mother awake and bringing her to the kitchen. And of course, at that time, whatever the hell it was had disappeared. I would have thought I was losing my mind if my dog hadn't been seeing the same thing as me. I peered out another window, checking the driveway in case it was a person, and they had driven here by car, but there was nothing. My mother went out onto the deck and looked around, but there was nothing there, except fingerprints on the window frame. We checked around the whole yard and nothing was found except for the prints. I'm quite traumatized to this day, knowing that whatever had been there was watching me for quite a while, and I didn't know it. And also, the fact that if it was a person, it would have taken a while to get off the land. Even if they were running away, we would have caught them because the yard is huge. I'm not living in this house where this happened anymore, thankfully. And I've had other experiences which are stories for another day, but I can't stress enough just how disturbing it was, and I wonder if it could have been some creature. To me, it's a more likely explanation than a human that just vanished. About 2 or 3 years ago, I was with some friends in my car outside one of my friends' houses. It was 9 PM in wintertime, so quite dark, but it was clear weather. There were 5 of us in the car, myself and a friend in the passenger seat, as well as 3 friends sitting in the middle row of the SUV. We were talking about some random topic when all of a sudden I felt an intense feeling going down my spine, like we were being watched. I turned to face my friend in the passenger seat, and he looked me up at the same time like he had just seen a ghost. I asked him if he too felt like that, and he said yes. None of my other friends in the back seat felt anything. We felt really strange, but ignored it and kept talking. A few minutes later, the feeling returned stronger than before, and once again my friend and I looked at each other at the same time. He looked right past me out the driver's side window, which my back was to, and told me to not turn around. None of my other friends saw anything, but he said there was something out there, and I felt some sort of presence behind me. We took turns describing to each other what we sensed it looked like, but we were for sure both seeing/sensing the same thing. It was pure, white and humanoid, but the details of what we sensed are fuzzy to me. A minute or so later it went away and we were totally spooked. This is where it gets weirder. My friend and I both felt the presence making circles around the car, and we began to both see green glowing circles moving quickly around it. It's hard to explain, but when we couldn't really see them, it was more like knowing they were there. They began to move faster, and we were freaking the hell out. Then, all of a sudden, they vanished. Once again, we both saw/felt these, but nobody in the back did. Then my passenger seat friend and I were leaning back to talk in the middle row, when all of a sudden, on the sidewalk behind the car there was a flash of white light, and a creature sprinted towards us. It was pure white, bipedal, somewhat humanoid, and very tall and lanky. I'm gonna guess it was probably 7 feet tall. It had a horse-shaped head, long, black, thin hair, black eyes and claws. My friend and I in the front screamed simultaneously, started the car and got the hell out of there. Once we were far, far away, we once again took turns describing to each other what we saw, and we both were on the point with each other's descriptions. I took everyone home. Then as I was driving home, I still felt the presence behind me. I couldn't tell if it was in the car or not, but whenever I got to a stop sign, I felt it catching up. So I sped up the rest of the way back. Once I got home, it was gone. Both my friend and I could sense that whatever it was wasn't there to kill us or anything, just to make its presence known. Nothing like it has happened before or since. The only relevant connecting factor between the passenger seat friend and I, that those in the back did not share, is that we were both Christian at the time. Any ideas on what we could have experienced would be greatly appreciated. I recently drove home from school to work for the summer before going back, and I haven't been up only to the National Forest, which is in Wisconsin, about 5 hours from my house. I took a friend along and we left this Saturday at around 10 AM and got there at 3:30 PM because the forest roads were pretty bad. The mosquitoes at this time of year are absolutely horrible, and the headwater wilderness is mostly swamp and marsh, so we hiked around for about 5 miles before finding a campsite down an abandoned but marked forest road that led to a private property 4 miles in. The private property has no access, but I saw that it was not a part of the federal land on my GAIA GPS app. The road was extremely overgrown, with large ostrich ferns on the entire path, down-limbed every half a mile or so, and plenty of dead wood to support a fire. We had set our packs about a mile back, and were just exploring down it further in hopes to find something cooler than the essentially solo beech forest that we had found. When it started getting dark, we decided to turn around, and when circumnavigating a downed tree, we found a small collection of branches and twigs bundled together in a sort of shrine shelter. A full 3-foot-tall shelter that had obviously taken a decent amount of time to build. It looked like it had a full interior of sticks too. I'm slightly superstitious, so I recognized this potential for it to be a Nessie or something similar, and we found some good wood to leave it as an offering and went on our way. Later that night our fire reignited, and we had to use a full gallon to douse it with no wind. I heard footsteps around our tent after my friend had used the restroom and gone back inside his tent. I heard what sounded like a log smack the base of a tree in a 1-2-3 pattern every 5 minutes, and I swear I heard a little sounding voice or giggle as I was trying to get to sleep. Needless to say, I got out of there in the morning. Nothing nefarious really happened though, so I'm not sure if it was just my imagination or some cryptid being mischievous with us because we didn't leave them a good enough offering. What do you guys think this could have been? I was rock climbing with 2 other guys in Colorado, and was belaying one of them when the 2 of us on the ground heard something weird. The commands we use to communicate that we are safe at the top of the route are name of guy on the ground, off belay, which prompts the belayer to unclip the rope from his belay device so the climber can pull slack out of the rope. The response to that command is name of the guy at the top of the route, belay off. The climber was approximately 40 meters up on a 50-meter route. I didn't know this at the time. The rope stopped moving, which isn't uncommon when someone is having a hard time with a move, or is setting up an anchor, which is what I thought was going on when we heard it. A voice that sounded way closer to the ground, like close enough that we could have had a shouting conversation, and way further left off the route, where the climb should have started. It said, Tommy Sticks off belay. I looked at the other guy in our climbing party who was just as confused as I was. He said to me, what the hell was that? And we discussed where the climber should be at the time and that we should not be able to hear him that well. The rope still wasn't moving, and I decided to keep him on belay. I figured it would be best to just keep him safe and feed slack through my belay device, in the event that this wasn't him. Turns out it wasn't. A few moments later the rope starts moving again, followed by a faint syllable counted Tommy Sticks off belay that sounded way more like it should have. We didn't think anything of it, but we had been travelling down the wall and hit a few routes without seeing anyone. We also had a few friends just a few months ago that burned in on a route when someone took him off belay when he wasn't safe. I remember seeing a video of a hiker walking down the road when he hears a voice of a woman calling him off the road. The guy stops trying to figure out what's going on, then just gets out of there because of how weird it was. I don't know what kind of creature would be mimicking a person out in the middle of nowhere, but any advice would be greatly appreciated. Around 10 to 15 years ago, me and a friend were driving down River Road when some winged creature swoops the hood of my car, surrounding and blocking both the windshield and wrapping around the passenger and driver's side windows and then vanishing. As we're driving, I'm telling her this story about this sleep paralysis demon I saw in a dream. It looked like a winged demon made of molten stone with red eyes, trapped behind a stone prison that it escapes and chases me. It's dark out, maybe 9 p.m, and as I'm telling this story, we drive under a large willow tree, and something drops out of the sky or tree and swoops the hood of my car, filling my entire windshield, wrapping around to the side windows with wings. My friend screams and I stop the car. I remember it now as an owl with feathery wings, but part of me remembers red eyes, black fleshy wings and a human face, but I'm unsure if that was just because of the images that were already running around in my head as I was telling the story. There are owls where we were, so I was wondering if maybe that was something owls do, swoop headlights or something, but there are no owls that would be large enough to explain what I saw. Just barn owls, and I've seen them before. I thought I'd ask around in case anyone has ever experienced something similar like this, as it's always bothered me, and my friend is sick of me asking her what she remembers. She just said it was weird, and she was too scared and closed her eyes. Has anyone else ever heard or had this happen to them? I'd love to hear from you. This happened in 2004. It's 3-something in the morning, and my family and I are preparing for a road trip to the Grand Canyon. We live in SoCal, and everything is getting packed away in the kitchen, and I'm asked to take out the garbage. I walk outside. It's the kind of dark that when it's too early for morning still, but too late for night, and freakishly quiet. I thought nothing of it at the time. Our trash cans were located on the side of the house in the backyard halfway to the gate. If you stood at the side of my house looking towards the gate, you would see a hedge to the left of the gate that goes up to your waist. Across the street is another house with a driveway light installed. The light gives off that blaring white security light. I get to the trash can, throw away the junk when I look over towards the gate. That's when I saw it, whatever it was. I could only see the outline of it because the blaring white security light was in my eyes, but it was the most smooth and round head I've ever seen, which connected to a very slouched shoulders. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at, just an odd shape, the same height of the hedges. It wasn't until it moved silently and slowly towards the bottom of the hedge at the neighbor's yard that I saw it looked headish. I was 14 at the time and just stood there waiting for more movement or sound. After about 1 minute of not hearing anything, I stepped back until I was able to sprint back towards the kitchen door. I don't know what it was or why it moved so silently, but it wasn't much longer before we moved out of that house due to strange things. Near where I live, there are some woods. It also has some small creeks, about 3 or 4, and is a place where kids go down to ride their bikes and hang out. Well, it was here that I had a very strange encounter. One day around 4 p.m. when I took my dog Bertha for our normal everyday walk. We had just gotten off the car and began. We were walking on the trail for about 5 minutes or so when I started feeling weird after a turn. Neither scared nor afraid. I started to feel happy as my little pain aches had disappeared. This was very strange because I remember saying to myself, inside my head, not out loud, "Wow, I feel so good. I feel like a little kid. I'm brand new." It was only about 20 seconds of this young and joyful feeling when all of a sudden, something had let go of a large bush that was holding onto it. The thing sounded like it was intertwined in the bush, like holding on and trying to hide. At the same time of the noise, Bertha turned towards the bush and started going after it. I had her on a leash, and she was dragging me, almost taking me into the woods. I held to hold her back, because I couldn't see what was making all of that noise. It moved through another tall bush and started stepping heavily with loud thumps. I think it fell whenever it made out of the bush area. The thing was only about 15 feet away from us on the other side of the bushes, and sounded like two very large horses stomping on the ground. I could see the bushes and the grass moving, but I couldn't see anything. We moved back away from the trail a few feet, so that I could see a clearing on the other side of the bushes to try and see this thing. I looked right where the sound of the steps were coming from and saw nothing. So I looked down on the ground and I could see where 2 feet were stepping on the tall grass. I remember I said to myself in my head, "No way, that's not an invisible monster." After I said that, I heard something I will never forget. The thing started making a loud T-Rex sort of sound. Stomps. Then I say out loud, "That sounds like a T-Rex from the movies." I recall I could feel the stomps on the ground, and Bertha and I were just looking into the woods at the sound. I could feel my eardrums shaking badly. I said in my head, "It's trying to blow out my eardrums." The T-Rex stomp lasted about 10 to 15 seconds, and then just stopped, as if it had turned off. I have no idea if it jumped into something or it vanished. It is strange because after all of that I still felt so happy with no worry or fear at all, just very curious. I really wanted to see it. On the way home I remember thinking, any other day I would have been afraid and ran away from it. I heard this thing 3 or 4 more times in the following days, in another section of woods. I could hear someone heavily walking on the leaves just inside the tree line about 30 feet away in the woods alongside me and Bertha. I would hear it, and I would stop without turning to it, and it would take a step or two, and it would stop. I turned around a few times to see nothing, because I wasn't moving. I did this a few times to make sure. I would tell myself in my head, if a person stays on the trail, they have no permission to take you. I think one time I heard his footsteps in the woods next to me, and I said to myself in my head, I think it wants me to make a mistake and go into the woods towards it. After I said that, I never heard it again. I think it can hear what I'm thinking. Just a few weeks ago, I had seen something very strange related to this thing. Bertha and I were walking in the same part of the trail, only 100 feet away from my first encounter where the bushes were. I stopped to look into the woods, and I was standing still looking past the trees, how the area was covered in a few inches of light green grass. I was looking kinda downhill, how the woods go down into the creek area, and I said to myself, it looks beautiful, the trees, the colour of the greens, and the sunlight in the shadow. It looks like a postcard. About 2 or 3 seconds after that, while I was looking down at this area of pristine woodland, I saw a big human shape blur, move between trees about 80 feet away. I saw it for a fraction of a second. It was big, perhaps 10 feet tall judging by the trees, with a big head, big wide muscular shoulders, and his big left leg I remember seeing, as his left knee and big muscle were above it. Laterals. I could see how the thick, shiny hair on the leg was, and it looked exactly like the predator from the movie when he's cloaked. It's very weird how my brain was able to capture this image. My memory surprised even me. His shoulders and head and the side of his back were reflecting the woods between him and me. It looked male if I had to hazard a guess. I was surprised just like him. In my opinion, I think he took off running because he thought I was sensing he was in the area, but I had no idea he was there. I think he knows Bertha can't pick him up, so he hides a little further from the trail. I'm very cautious when I go hiking in those woods now. I also tell people where I'm going and carry a few extra things hidden on me. I have no idea why this thing got so close to me or what its intentions were, and I also don't know why it ran from me. Was there something behind it that startled it? These occurrences were a very incredible time in my life and changed me in a good way. I often think I don't know, but maybe that's why dogs are on this planet, to help us pick up on these things we don't see. Always be happy and do the things you love doing in your life. Have no worries and certainly no fear. I hope my story helps people be alert and careful to what's out there in the world. A few years ago, I experienced a strange incident that continues to baffle me. It occurred one night when I was abruptly awoken from my slumber by an urgent need to use the bathroom. As I opened my eyes, they stung from the glare of the TV that I habitually left on while falling asleep. I have a peculiar habit of listening to horror stories as I drift off, which I suppose isn't ideal for a restful night's sleep. Reluctantly, I mustered the resolve to get out of bed, even though the cold of the winter made it especially unappealing. It was in the middle of the year, during South Africa's winter season. I begrudgingly made my way to the small bathroom adjoining my room, quickly attending to my needs. As I turned my head towards the window, situated across the room from the bathroom, I noticed a slight gap between the curtains. Through that opening, illuminated by the glow of my TV, I focused my gaze on my neighbor's roof. To my astonishment, I spotted a figure that resembled a gargoyle complete with wings. At first, I convinced myself that my eyes were playing tricks on me, but to my horror, the figure actually moved. Grateful for the fact that I was still seated on the toilet, I managed to avoid an embarrassing incident. Eventually, curiosity overcame my fear, and I summoned the courage to investigate further. Approaching the window cautiously, I strained to get a closer look at the mysterious creature. Just as I reached the window, it abruptly turned to face my neighbor's backyard. From my vantage point, I could discern its profile. Glowing red or orange eyes. The darkness of the night made it difficult to see other details in full, but I could make out what seemed to be dark, possibly scaly skin, though I hesitate to classify it as skin, given the strange nature of the creature. In an instant, the creature spread its wings, which appeared remarkably large, and vanished from sight, as if it had vanished in the blink of an eye. The thought of this colossal entity prowling around my house with my pets outdoors sent my heart plummeting into my stomach. Filled with apprehension, I diligently searched for my animals, eventually finding them and bringing them safely inside. Finally, I closed all the windows and attempted to go back to sleep. Although my mind was plagued with unease, I never encountered the creature or anything similar again, gradually forgetting about the incident as time passed. Yet I remained perplexed as to what I witnessed that night. I find myself seeking help and advice, concerned that perhaps I'm losing my sanity, and confident this was no dream, as the pain I felt when my cat accidentally scratched me in her startled state was too real. If anyone can offer any insight or guidance regarding what I saw, I would deeply appreciate it. I lived in Nevada with my wife, in a newly constructed house that was 3 floors. The master bedroom was on the 3rd floor, and there were no doors up to the master floor. It was just open, like a loft, but it was a full-sized area, not a converted attic or anything. This is pretty common in Nevada so that they can squeeze in as many thin, taller houses as possible. One night about a month ago, into moving into the house, we're both asleep. I wake up in the middle of the night around 2ish, and see all the way to the other side of the room a little creature, all black. I couldn't make out any features or eyes or anything, but it was small, maybe 2 feet tall, with 2 arms and legs like a person, but was wider and didn't move like a person. It was unnaturally fast. It ran quickly to the edge of the bed, and I could tell it was looking right at me. It could move. I could move. And I was very conscious in remembering, I don't have time for this. I remember it peered over the mattress, and it had a longer nose, but for some reason, it was not able or allowed to get onto the bed. I watched it for about 10 seconds and then thought, okay, if I can't get up, I'm just going to roll over. So I rolled over and nothing else happened that night. I know it's pretty anticlimactic, but that's what happened, and I never saw anything in the house again. I was definitely awake, and I could move, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. I've had that once, and that's much worse and terrifying. I'm just wondering if anyone has seen anything like it, if there's a name to it. I'd just like more information. I'd like to share something that happened to me when I was 9 years old, and remember really well even now that I'm 36. It bothers me that I have not been able to find a proper explanation, and I'm asking for your help. I was on holiday with my family at Gabice, a fairly known place on the Adriatic coast of Italy. As I'm mentioning it, because there are several weird legends surrounding the region, like the Valbrunas town, which is known as the Italian Atlantis, since it apparently submerged by the sea for unknown reasons during Roman times, and fishers and locals claim to have found remnants of columns, temples, and other proof of it, as well as an ancient temple dedicated to Zeus, which was located on the St. Bartolo Mount, which is located just nearby, or miraculous sightings of the Virgin Mary. It's quite an eerie place, because mountains and sea and towns are all just merged together. I was taking a stroll with my father where there are many people surrounding us because it was June and the streets near the seaside were crowded, when I suddenly saw something really weird lying on the pavement. It was an animal's leg. A reptile's apparently, which had been cut off, but instead of dripping blood it oozed a clear slimy fluid. It was dark green, almost black in colour, covered in scales with little lighter underneath, with 3 slender digits, the middle one longer than the others, and every digit spotted a curved claw like a hen's foot. Of course I got really spooked off, and instantly tried grabbing my father's attention about my discovery, but he looked really annoyed at me, claiming there was nothing on the pavement. I'm absolutely sure he wasn't lying, because at the same time, I was also really sure about what I saw. No one else seemed to notice this horrible thing, so I just walked away. When I got back a few hours later, of course, there was nothing. And as I got older, I did research and found some similarities with taselworm's leg. But since the creature is legendary and apparently doesn't really exist, I was more oriented to believing that it could have been an abnormally big slowworm or lizard's leg, except those usually have 4 digits instead of 3 and don't sport any sort of clothes. I mean, if it was a cryptid's leg, though other people should have seen it, right? I'm honestly at a loss at what exactly this was and how it was there and how my father didn't see it. Any advice would be really appreciated regarding this phantom limb. And that concludes our first video. I hope you liked the creepy cryptid stories as much as I did. Which one was your favorite? Be sure to let me know down below. I'm going to hit you again tomorrow with some pretty terrifying Deepwood stories, so be sure to come back every day this week for even more stories from the woods. That's all I've got time for today. Be sure to click another video on screen now, but until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.